At Epoxy Plus, we appreciate the millions of people that have viewed our videos. Metallic epoxy floors are amazing and we love showing you how to install them. But we realize that most of our videos focus on the actual metallic part of the system. And that's just a small part of it. There's so much more that goes into a successful metallic epoxy floor installation. So we decided to create a special video series that will show you step by step everything that goes into installing a successful designer metallic epoxy floor. We're going to start off with the initial visual inspection. We'll discuss crack repair. We'll discuss surface prep and show you how we use diamond tools to prepare the concrete surface. We'll prime the surface. We'll mix the metallic pigments, we'll mix the metallic epoxy kit, and then we'll install it on the floor. Then at the end of the video, we'll show you how to install our High Wear Urethane top coat system in 3 different finishes. We realize that you're investing in our product, and we feel that an investment of your time will only lead to your success. So let's get started. All right, so the very first thing that we want to do before we start any project is to inspect our space, inspect the concrete that we're going to coat. So we're going to go ahead and do that now. We're going to pretend that this is a garage floor that we're getting ready to coat with our epoxy. So let's look around and see if there's anything that we need to address during the prep stage of our floor. All right, so here's the garage floor that we're going to coat with our metallic epoxy system. And what we want to do is find anything that needs to be addressed during the prep stage or anything that's going to be any kind of an issue. So I can see right here that there's a crack in the floor that's going to need to be repaired. So you can see it runs pretty much the width of the whole floor. So we'll go ahead and make a note of that we'll need to use some of our quick patch in order to handle that. And then as we move over, something that's very common in most garages or on most surfaces that you're going to prep for is some paint. So we'll go ahead and make sure that we're prepared to address that also during our prep. It looks like this floor is fairly level, so we know that the epoxy's going to flow real nicely on this floor. There doesn't look like there's any real low spots that need to be addressed. I don't see any divots or anything like that, but if there was, that's something that would also be addressed with our quick patch. So all in all, this floor looks pretty good, so we'll go ahead and get ready for our prep of the actual concrete floor. At this point, you would also make sure that there were not any moisture issues with the concrete, as hydrostatic pressure could cause the epoxy to bubble and eventually fail. If you do have a moisture issue, we encourage you to contact us to discuss what options are available. So when it comes to concrete, there's pretty much one thing that we can guarantee is that at some point your concrete is going to crack. So what we have is a product called Quick Patch that will take care of any cracks, whether it be hairline cracks or anything maybe even just a little bit larger, before we put our epoxy coating on our floor. Now, you don't have to repair the cracks. You could actually just install your epoxy right on top of the floor, and the epoxy would settle down into any cracks or grooves that you have in the concrete, and it would just become part of the overall look of the floor. But we know that most of you are going to want to go ahead and, as part of your prep process, go ahead and repair those cracks. So we'll use our Quick Patch product for that. Now, as you can see, the Quick Patch is a 2-part epoxy product. It comes in an A and a B. It comes in a 1-gallon kit, so there's a half a gallon of A and a half a gallon of B. And the way that we mix it is very simple. I like to use just a piece of cardboard, or you can get a wood board, or really anything to mix the product on. This is not a critical mix, meaning that we don't have to have the exact same amount of A as we do B. We want to get it real close, but it's not like mixing up any of our other epoxy products where we're looking for an exact mix ratio. This will still harden even though we're not at exactly 50-50. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and we'll take a scoop like this and put it out on the cardboard. Just like that. And then we'll go ahead and we'll try to take what will look like about an equal amount of the B part. And as you can see, the B is a lot thicker than the A part. And so we'll put this out on our cardboard here. And as you can see, that looks to be pretty close to 50-50, but we're not concerned that it's exact. What we're going to do now is we're going to take our margin trowel here and we're going to just mix this until it becomes one even color all the way through. So what we're trying to do here is blend our A and our B component together so that we have one consistent color all the way through. You can see here that we've still got some of the A part that's not mixed, that darker gray color. So we want to go ahead and continue mixing this until we've got one solid shade of gray all the way through. So, and it's just kind of like folding dough. Just keep mixing it into each other. And you can use a number of different tools to do this. I'm using a margin trowel, but you could use really a putty knife or any other type of instrument that you want in order to be able to mix this. So this now looks good. As you can see, we've got one consistent color of gray going all the way through. So that's how we know that we're actually ready to start applying the quick patch into the crack. So we'll set that tool aside for right now. Now basically you want to use a putty knife to do this. You can use one like this, a metal one. You have to clean it up at the end, obviously. Or you have plastic putty knives that you can buy at Home Depot or Lowe's or any of your local home improvement stores, and that way you can just throw them away at the end of the project. But what we want to basically do is take some on the putty knife and start at the end of our crack and use it with some pressure and then strike it off. Put some more in, use some pressure and strike it off. I can see right here that I'm a little bit low, so I'm going to add just a little bit more in there and then strike it off. Now you want this quick patch to be as workable as possible. So it does start setting up after about 20 minutes or so. It'll be workable probably for 30 to 40 minutes, but it starts really tacking up and starting to harden at about 20 minutes when it's in a mass like this on your cardboard or your board. So only mix up what you can use in about 20 minutes. So if you have just a few cracks like we have on this floor, this is probably about the right amount. But if you had a lot of cracks over a very large area, you're going to want to mix in just small batches. That way you can not waste any of the product. So we'll go ahead and add a little bit more there and then strike it off nice and flat with our putty knife. So what we want to do when we strike off the quick patch from our crack, we want to try to get it as flat as we possibly can. But if you end up with little raised areas like this that's made with the edge of the putty knife, it's not the end of the world, because don't forget that the next step after this is to grind our concrete floor. So when we grind the concrete floor, it's going to take care of any little raised areas like that. Now we can certainly help ourselves out by striking this off as smooth as we can get it, but we're not going to be too upset if we end up with a few raised areas like that. We'll take care of that once we grind over this entire surface. All right, so that's all there is to using the quick patch. It's pretty simple to do. Once again, we mixed equal parts of A and B. We blended them together on our mixing surface here, and then we used the putty knife to put it into the cracks. We struck it off as smooth as we could possibly get it, and then now we'll wait for it to dry. The quick patch dries dependent upon how thick we've put it into the cracks, but generally it'll take several hours to dry, up to 6 or 7 hours, depending on temperatures and thickness and things like that. However, one of the advantages to using our quick patch is that we could actually, right now if we wanted to, we could go ahead and we could prime right over top of the quick patch. Now in this case we haven't ground the concrete yet, so we're not ready, but let's say we had already ground our concrete and then we came across a crack that we didn't originally see. We can mix up a little batch of quick patch, fill the crack, and then we'd be ready to go with our epoxy primer right on top of it. So just another little added bonus of using quick patch. So we'll go ahead and we'll repair the other cracks along the floor, and then we'll be ready to grind the concrete. All right, so we just have spent some time now, and we've gone around the floor and we've used our quick patch and we filled in all of the cracks. We're pretty satisfied with the way that they look. Some of them might need a second coat depending on how deep they are, because what will happen sometimes is the quick patch, because it's a heavy material, if it's in a deep crack, it'll want to drop down and settle into the bottom of the crack. So after we let some time go by, probably 4 or 5 hours, we'll go around and we'll take a look at our cracks and we'll make a determination whether or not we want to do a second coat of quick patch. But now it's time to clean up our tools. That can be done by using any type of a solvent like denatured alcohol, acetone, any of those types of products. Now once again, you do have the option of just purchasing some disposable plastic putty knife, and that way you can just throw them away, but in this case we have some more expensive ones, so we'll go ahead and we'll clean them up. Just as a note as well, if you didn't want to use a tool like this to scoop out the A and the B parts of the quick patch, you could use really anything. These happen to be some wooden shims. You could use a paint stir stick, just anything in order to scoop out the A and the B to put onto your piece of cardboard or your wood where you're actually going to combine and mix the A and the B parts. So just another little tip. It'll save you from having to use an extra tool that you'll need to clean up at the end of the job. And then we get asked a lot about storage, because this is a 1 gallon kit. It's 2 half-gallon cans, an A and a B. So especially for our contractors, you can purchase the quick patch, you can use it on a particular job, and as long as you seal these lids back down really tight and secure, these will be good for your next project, so nothing will go to waste. So that's all we have on the quick patch, and now we'll come back tomorrow and we'll start grinding our floor. All right, so the next step in the process is to grind the concrete and get it ready for the application of our epoxy. So we've assembled the tools that we need in order for us to be able to do that, and we'll go ahead and show you how we use them. So surface prep is very important when it comes to installing your epoxy floor. So we've assembled some of the tools that you'll need. Now some of you may own these pieces of equipment, but for most of you, you'll probably go to your local rental center and rent them. We have a 175 RPM standard floor buffing machine, and we're going to use our Velcro backed tool holder to hold our diamond pucks. We also have gone ahead and assembled a dust skirt on our machine because we're trying to do this with as minimal dust as possible. So our dust skirt has been assembled, and we've got it attached to our shop vac. So what we're going to do is go ahead and install the diamond pucks. These are 16 grit. They're available on our website, as is the Velcro holder as well as the dust skirt. So we're going to go ahead and assemble the set of 6 on our Velcro backed pad. And I like to put them right up to the edge. That way as we grind, we're getting as close to the edge as we possibly can. So we'll go ahead and get the 6 of them on here. And we're going to try to just space them out just as evenly as we possibly can. And then we'll go ahead and attach it to our floor buffer. And just like that, we're ready to go. So let's go ahead and start grinding. All right, so we've been grinding on this floor for just a few minutes. We're using a 175 RPM floor buffer. We've got our Velcro backed attachment on the bottom of it, and we have our 16 grit diamond pucks attached to the bottom of that. We've installed the dust skirt on our machine. All of this equipment is available on our website, and the equipment does a really nice job. We're also using safety glasses, and we're also using a dust mask or a respirator that can handle any silica dust. So this is basically the profile that we're looking for as we prep our floor for the epoxy. As you can see, the diamond pucks have done a really nice job of smoothing out the floor. But when we say smooth, we're still looking for a texture, almost like a sandpaper type texture. You can see here that the aggregate of the concrete is actually just starting to be exposed, and that's exactly what we're looking for. You can see a really nice scratch pattern here in the concrete. This is opening up the pores of the concrete and is going to allow the primer to suck down into the concrete. You can see here as well that I just started grinding over the crack that we repaired yesterday with the quick patch. It was a little bit high in spots, but these diamond pucks have actually smoothed it over so that our crack now is nice and flush with the rest of the floor, and that's exactly what we're looking for. So we're going to go ahead and work on this crack a little bit more, get the quick patch ground down or sanded down nice and flush, and then we'll continue on grinding the rest of the concrete and creating the perfect profile for the epoxy primer. So here is something that more than likely you're going to encounter during your project, especially on a garage floor where we got some paint. So that paint needs to be removed. Some people think, well, it's just paint and I'm using a type of paint to go on top of it. Well, that's not the case. We actually do want to try to remove any paint that we have on our concrete surface. And the diamonds that we're using on the bottom of this machine, or the diamond tool that you can rent at your local rental center will be able to take care of this paint. So we're going to go ahead and use the same process, the same equipment, and we're going to get rid of this paint. So we just passed the diamond tools over top of this paint, and as you can see, it's totally gone. So these tools will do the job. Now there's some paint that obviously is going to take a little bit more work than others, but in general these types of tools that we're using today will take care of this paint, and it's something that really needs to be done. That way the primer is going to absorb into concrete and not trying to attach itself to paint that could be loose, could be flaking. We want a nice porous concrete surface for our primer to be able to adhere to. So we have a little bit more paint here still to go. We're going to go ahead and take care of that, and then we're going to continue on and we're going to grind the rest of the floor. All right, so we just finished grinding our floor, and once again, to recap, we used our 175 RPM floor buffer, which you can rent at any local rental store. We used one of our Velcro-backed attachments that you can find under the tools category of our website, and then we attached a set of 6 16 grit diamond pucks to the bottom of that. We hooked up our dust skirt on our buffer, and then we attached it to our shop vac. And as you can see, the shop vac with the dust skirt really kept the dust down. There wasn't a plume of smoke out in the air. It wasn't cloudy with smoke. It really kept it right onto the ground. So these are great tools to use. For most of you, you're going to rent them at your local rental center. However, we do have many of these tools available for sale on our website. So again, as you can see, there wasn't a lot of dust created up in the air, but we do have a fine layer of dust that's on the floor, and we need to get rid of that. So the next step in the process is to go ahead and vacuum out the whole floor in preparation for our primer. So let's go ahead and do that now. So now we've got the dust up off the floor, which is really a critical part of the prep. We don't want the dust to create any type of a barrier for the primer to be able to absorb into the concrete surface. But there you have it. That's how you prep a floor for epoxy using diamonds. And of course, it is the recommended way. Now, some may say, well, I can create this same type of profile by using an acid wash. And while that might be the method that some recommend, we don't. But there's a couple of reasons why. The main reason is that when you introduce acid onto the concrete, it raises the pH level of the concrete very high. Epoxy needs a neutral pH in order for it to really be able to bond well. So in other words, if you introduce the acid, you're raising the pH, creating an issue. Now we can solve that issue by neutralizing the acid on the concrete. We can do that by using baking soda or ammonia. We can do a rinse of any of those types of products. But now we've introduced a lot of water into the concrete. Water is an enemy of any type of a coating. It can cause the coating to blister and peel off of the surface. So we don't want to introduce a lot of water to the surface. If we do, then we have to wait a number of days, maybe even a week or more, for all of that moisture to come up out of the concrete. Now, some people will walk back into their garage the next morning after doing that and say, hey, the floor looks like it's dry. And on the surface, that could be the case, but really that concrete is holding a lot of moisture in there. And if we're not careful, we're going to go ahead and coat our concrete, and then within a matter of days sometimes, or within a few weeks, month or two, we're going to have that trapped moisture that was caused by us acid washing the concrete. We're going to have that underneath our epoxy, creating hydrostatic pressure, and it's going to lead to a whole lot of issues that we don't want to deal with. So while we're saying that, or we're not saying that you can't acid wash the concrete, what we are saying is you need to make a determination whether or not that's the way you want to go. And if you choose to acid wash, you need to be very, very careful that you're not going to trap moisture. So while this might be maybe just a little bit more work, this really is going to be a much better method of prepping the concrete for the epoxy. So we've created a very nice profile here. We've got a really nice scratch pattern. And again, as you can see, we've started to expose just a little bit of the aggregate of the concrete, and that's exactly what we're looking for. We're opening up the concrete. We're creating a profile where the primer is going to be able to absorb deep down into the concrete. So you saw that the method, while it was a little bit of work, it really wasn't that dusty because we used the dust skirt on our floor buffing machine. We also used a shop vac, and we were very careful to clean out the filter periodically. So about every couple hundred square feet, we went ahead and we cleaned out the filter of the vacuum to keep it nice so that it could absorb all of the dust that we were creating from the floor. Now there was a little bit of dust on the surface, so we went ahead and we vacuumed that a couple of times, and now we've got a very nice clean profile. Safety-wise, we wore safety glasses while we were doing this, and we also wore a dust mask that could handle the silica dust that was created by grinding the concrete. So that's about all there is to the prep. Now we're going to go ahead and we're going to get ready to install the primer. So just prior to us getting ready to put down our primer, we're going ahead and putting some blue painter's tape on the baseboard here. And this is just to protect the baseboard. And we're using blue painter's tape so that way it peels off real easy. And we're also not applying a lot of pressure to the tape because it's not going to be stuck on this wall very long, and we also want it to be able to peel off very easily after we install our metallic epoxy, because we're going to pull it while the metallic epoxy is wet, and then that's going to save us from having to come in with knives or razor blades or anything like that and the next day after the epoxy gets hard. So we're putting it on just so that it can protect the baseboard. And in some cases, you may not even have the trim in yet. It might just be drywall, so you don't even have to do this. Or you might be putting down quarter round, and so you don't have to do this either. But we're going to go ahead and get it all taped, and then the next step is going to be to put our primer down. So we want to walk you through the steps now of mixing up the epoxy primer. This is our EPE 300 water-based epoxy primer, and we make it in black, so that way when you put down your primer, it has a really nice base for amplifying the metallic pigments. It also comes in white, but we're going to go ahead and mix up a batch of our black water-based epoxy primer. So this is a 4-to-1 mix. It's a 1.25 gallon kit, so you have 1 gallon of part A, and then you have a quart of your hardener. So it's 1 gallon plus the quarter gallon, so that's how we come to our 1.25 gallon kit. And this kit covers between 400 and 500 square feet of flooring space. So we'll go ahead and we'll take off our lids. And what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and pour the 1 gallon of A into our mixing container. We'll go ahead and try to get all of it out. And then we'll go ahead and we'll also dump our quart of the B hardener in there as well. And you'll see it's kind of like a honey color. And we'll go ahead and just let this drain out for a few seconds. Since this is our hardener, we want to try to get as much of it into the bucket as we possibly can. All right, so that's pretty good. And then we'll take our drill and mixing paddle, and we're going to go ahead and mix this up for about 2 to 3 minutes. We'll do it just at a moderate speed. There's no need to whip this fast so it splashes around. Mix it on a moderate speed for about 2 minutes or so. We're mixing just a 1.25 gallon batch of this right now, but because the water-based epoxy has such a long working time, you could go ahead and mix more than one kit at a time. You can mix 2 in a 5-gallon pail. right, so we've just combined the A and the B part of our primer kit in this bucket. So right now we have a 1.25 gallon kit, but we're now going to add a half a gallon of cold water to this mix. And that does a couple of things. One, it gives you more product. Now you have 1.75 gallons of product, but the water also helps to suck the primer down into the concrete to give it a better bond to the concrete. So it's half a gallon of cold water to each 1.25 gallon kit. And now that we've added it to our mixing bucket, we're going to go ahead and mix all three components now, the A, the B, and the water, for about another 2 minutes. And again, we're doing this at just a moderate speed, a slow speed. It mixes up very easily. Now you might find, depending on the time of the year that your product has been delivered to you, that you might have some of the product settling, in particular the A part with the pigment at the bottom. So it's not uncommon for you to see some thick pigment at the bottom, and all you need to do is take a paint stir stick or something and just kind of scrape that out and make sure that it gets into the mixing container. So you can see we're just mixing this at a very moderate speed. Nothing splashing out of the container. We're keeping our workspace very neat. We're not getting any product on us or on the floor. And this looks to be just about right. So we'll go ahead now and we'll start getting ready to actually put it on the floor. So we just mixed up our 1.25 gallon kit of our water-based epoxy primer. Now remember, because we added a half a gallon of cold water to that, we actually have just under 2 gallons of material that we have in our bucket. So we're going to go ahead and put that down now on this floor, and it's actually a very simple process to do this. There's a few different ways that you can do it if you choose. I'm going to demonstrate what I feel is the easiest way. Some people will want to pour this out on the floor and then take a squeegee, like a magic trowel, and squeegee it around the floor and then back roll it wearing spiked shoes. I just don't feel like that's necessary unless you want to do it that way. This is the way that we like to do it here. Very simply, we just take some out of our bucket and we just pour a ribbon. And as you can see, this primer, it's very liquidy, very watery. It's a water-based epoxy primer, and then we added a half a gallon of water to that as well to extend it. So it's really very watery. But we're going to start off by just saturating our roller, our edge roller, and we're going to run the edges real quick. But as you can see, by doing it this way, there's really no need to have to walk in the product. It's just a bit cleaner, neater way. It doesn't dirty up a squeegee either. And in the end, we're going to accomplish the exact same thing. So we've got our tape up on the baseboard to protect it. And so that's the edges. And now we'll go ahead and we'll take an 18-inch roller. Same idea. So we're going to go ahead and saturate it at first. And of course, as with all of our products, when you first start using the roller cover, it soaks up a lot of the material. But then it's just as simple as rolling it into place. And I'm going to go ahead and pour just a little bit more material down because, like I said, right here at the beginning, the roller cover soaked up a lot. So we'll go ahead and pour that out. Now what we're looking for is a nice even coat between 400 and 500 square feet per kit, not per gallon, but per kit. So in this case, again, this 1.25 gallon kit has actually yielded 1.75 gallons of material. So that material will cover between 400 and 500 square feet. And you can see there's really no wrong way to do this. We're just trying to cover the space with the material. We don't want to leave any puddles. We can back roll over it a couple of times, but there's no need to walk out in this material. So there is a range in coverage of 400 to 500 square feet because you might have concrete that's extremely porous and it's going to soak up more material than another floor would. So there is a range, but we're looking for a thin, even coat. And this is basically just like painting your floor. Except in this case, we're using a water-based epoxy primer. Now we're putting it on so thin that we can actually see the pattern, the scratch pattern from our diamonds that we use to prepare the concrete. And that's totally fine if that happens. But what we don't want to see is any of the concrete still showing through anywhere. We want to make sure that that's totally sealed up because if it's not, it could cause some outgassing and it could lead to some bubbles in the concrete. So we'll go ahead and do some of our edges again. And again, we're using 3/8 nap roller covers to do this. And one other thing that I've learned from experience is that it's much easier to put down material than it is to try to take up material if you put down too much. So put down just a little bit, and if you find that you need more, well, then we can easily go ahead and pour some more. But we don't want to dump out a massive puddle of material and then find we get to the end of the room, we have so much excess material on the floor, and now we got to figure out some kind of way to get it up because we don't want to leave this primer thick on the floor. If it's on too thick, we run the risk of it peeling. And don't forget, this is what our metallic epoxy is going to bond to. So we want to make sure that we get that thin coat down and we get it within the recommended coverage rate. So here's a spot that we rolled over right here, and the concrete's very porous in that spot there. So it's sucked up a lot of the primer, and you can see it looks like almost like a white spot there. That's actually just the concrete showing through. We don't want to leave it like that. We want a solid black base. So that means that we need to dip our roller a little bit more and then just go over that spot just like this. It could also be because there's a little dip in the concrete right there that the roller's not getting into. Whatever the case, whatever the reason, we do not want to see white spots like that. So we're going to roll over it. And again, if you're seeing roller marks and things like that on this floor, that's fine. It's just the primer. We're not concerned about that at all. We're just trying to get primer into concrete. So we just use our roller to push it down into any spaces that might look a little bit dry, or any spaces that the roller has skipped. So here's another little low spot that I'm seeing there on the floor, so we'll just go ahead and work that in. You can roll this in any direction that you want to roll it, it doesn't matter. And again, you do have the option of, you want to put on your spike shoes so that you can walk out in it, that's totally fine. You can squeegee it and back roll it, which is fine. You can dip and roll it, totally fine. Or you can pour out beads of it out onto the floor like we're doing here and roll it that way, which I think is actually the easiest way to do it. So pour some more out on the floor. Very, very easy product to work with. Of course, everything involving floor coatings is temperature dependent, but you have about an hour and a half up to 2 hours to leave this stuff in the bucket and work with it. So again, you can mix up as much of it as you like. It's a 4-to-1 mix. We recommend really just mixing up one kit at a time, and that way you don't have any issues with it tacking up on you or starting to turn into a gel state in the bucket. You have plenty of working time to do it. We have people that call us and ask us if the priming is actually that important, or is it something that they can skip. The technical answer to that question is, I guess you could skip it, but the primer serves a purpose. It seals up the concrete so that it drastically reduces the chances of bubbles, and it promotes adhesion of your metallic coat, and it also helps your metallic coat to spread easier, better, and farther out on the floor. So we say it's part of the system, and we recommend that you buy the complete entire system. The drying time on this primer is typically between 2 and 4 hours. Again, it's all temperature, humidity dependent. We've seen it dry in as little as 30 minutes. And sometimes if your concrete's cold or the temperature is a little bit cold outside of the range that we recommend, we've seen it take 5 and 6 hours to dry, but your average is between 2 and 4. Speaking of temperatures, we recommend installing the primer between 68, 72 degrees is optimum. Obviously, the warmer the conditions, the faster that this is going to want to dry. And if you're working in cooler environments where your temperatures are, in the mid to lower 60s, it's going to take longer. And don't forget, if your air temperature is 60 degrees, well, chances are the slab that you're working on could be 45 degrees. So you need to take that into account when it comes to drying times. But you do want to try to work within the recommended temperatures, because that's just going to eliminate any chances of anything happening that you don't want, such as bubbles or really shortening your pot life on the product. So that's basically all there is to rolling out the primer. And now we'll just let this dry, and then we'll go ahead and later on today we'll put down our metallic epoxy. So we've allowed the primer to dry for about 2 hours. It typically takes between 2 and 4 hours depending on temperatures. It was in the mid-70s in this space, so it took about 2 hours for the primer to dry. And now I just want to show you what it is that you're looking for to know that the primer has been installed correctly and that you're ready to install the metallic epoxy on top of it. So as we take a look around the space here, you can see that there's a nice sheen to the floor. However, there's variations in the sheen. If you look in certain spots of the floor, you can see that there are parts that are shinier than others, and you can actually still see some of the texture of the concrete, and that's okay. That's exactly what we would expect because the concrete surface here has different porosities all over it depending on how we ground the concrete and various other factors. But in general, we're looking for 100% coverage of the floor with our primer. We don't want any bare spots at all, and we don't have any bare spots on this floor. You can actually even see some of the scratch marks that are in the concrete from when we were doing our grinding, and that's totally fine. But we do have primer that's down in every scratch, covering every part of the concrete. So we're actually real satisfied with this, and we'll go ahead now and begin the process of installing the metallic epoxy. Keep in mind that at this point you will have 24 hours to install the metallic epoxy on top of the primer, or else you will have to sand the surface to create a proper bond. All right, so we're almost at the point where we can install our metallic epoxy onto our prepared surface. But before we do that, there's a little bit of preparation that's still left, and that is to go ahead and mix our pigments into our A part of our epoxy and get all of those kits ready that we're going to use for our installation. We recommend mixing the pigments in the A part for about 10 minutes or so prior to adding the B part in, and we're going to go ahead and we're going to line up all of our kits for our project and do this in the A part for all of our kits, whether we have one kit that we're going to use today or whether we have multiple kits. This is part of the pre-prep, and we mix our pigment into the A part. The reason being is that it takes so much time. It takes about 10 minutes for each kit, and we're just not going to have the time to be able to stop and do that and mix it correctly once the installation has begun on this floor. So in order to do that, we have our 3-gallon kit of epoxy here, and we're going to go ahead and open up the A cans. So it'll be 2 gallons of A because this is a 2-to-1 mix of epoxy. It's 2 parts A to 1 part B hardener. So we'll go ahead and open that, and then we'll pour the entire contents into our mixing bucket. So there's the 1st gallon there. And there's the 2nd gallon of our A. So if we had, say we were using 5 kits on a project, we'd have our 5 3-gallon buckets lined up, and we would dump in 2 gallons of A into each of the 5 buckets. The next step is to get our pigment, and for this particular floor we're going to do it in silver. So we open it up and we dump the entire contents into our 2 gallons of A. And this is a 16-ounce jar of pigment. It's a real 16 ounces. It's a full pound of pigment, so it's going to color the epoxy real nice. And then we begin the mixing process. So we take our drill and our mixing paddle, and we can start off real slow, and we just want to mix this extremely thoroughly. Then we can increase our speed a little bit as we go. We want to be careful that we don't do it too fast in order to introduce excess air into the mix. All right, now what we want to do is we want to make sure that we go ahead and scrape the sides of the bucket here. And you can do it with anything. You can do it with a tool like I'm using, or even just a paint stir stick or anything, just to make sure you don't have excess pigment clinging to the sides. And then we'll continue to mix it. So we just continue to mix this and move the drill around. And again, we're making sure that the pigments are thoroughly mixed. It saves time later. It also helps to prevent any of the little comets that sometimes show up in epoxy. And there, the alarm just went off, telling us that we just set it for 10 minutes. So that's all there is to mixing the pigments. And again, this was just for one kit, but if we had multiple kits, whether it be 1 or 50 kits, it doesn't matter. We would go ahead and we would pre-mix all of our pigments into the A part. If we were using multiple colors on this floor, we'd have some, let's say, of silver, some of pearl, whatever our colors are, we're pre-mixing all of the pigment into the A part. We have not added any B yet. This is only being mixed in part A. And then now that that's done, we can let this sit for a few minutes while we gather up all of our tools and get ready to actually add the B and install the metallic epoxy floor. So we finished pre-mixing all of our pigments, and just before we start the application of our epoxy, we want to make sure that we have all of the tools necessary for a successful installation. So the first thing we have is our spike shoes. We've got our Magic Trowel squeegee. We've got an 18-inch roller, and we've also got a 4-inch roller for the edges, and we're also wearing some gloves. All of these things can be found in our installation toolkit that you can find on our website. And we've also done one last inspection of the floor, making sure that there's no dust or dirt that's gotten onto the surface. If it has, we can use some denatured alcohol on a microfiber cloth or applicator in order to clean that up. But this floor looks like it's in really good shape, and so we'll go ahead now and we'll combine the B into our A and go ahead and pour the floor. All right, so now that we've determined that we have everything in place, we have our tools ready, we've done an examination of the surface that we're about to cover, there's no dirt, there's no dust, we're now ready to combine the B part into our A part so that way we can pour the metallic epoxy floor. Now once again, this bucket contains 2 gallons of part A, and we have already pre-mixed our silver metallic pigment in the bucket. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to combine the 1 gallon. This is each a half a gallon can here. We're going to combine the 1 gallon of part B hardener into our 2 gallons. Again, it's that 2-to-1 mix, 2 parts A to 1 part B. We're going to set our timer for 3 minutes, and we're going to mix the epoxy at a moderate speed. So I'll go ahead and we'll start the timer. We'll dump in our B. And now we've just added a full gallon of part B to our 2 gallons of part A. Now, just as a reminder, this process of combining the B into the A only starts when you're ready to actually start installing the floor, and we're only working with one kit at a time. So just to explain, let's say you had 5 or 6 kits of epoxy that was required in order to do a large space. We're still only going to be working with one kit of epoxy at a time. So you'll have your kits with the A part sitting off to the side, but you'll only be working with one kit where you're combining the B into the A at a time, and that's to give us the maximum amount of working time. Because if you were to go ahead and add all of the Bs to all of your kits, that's going to start the curing process. You also have 3 gallons of epoxy in a plastic bucket, so it's in a mass. It's going to start generating its own heat, and that epoxy within a matter of minutes is going to start to get hard on you. It'll start to smoke, it'll get chunky, and literally within a matter of minutes it will be a block sitting in the bottom of your bucket. So this is our first 3-gallon kit. It's going to do our first 180 square feet, and that's all we're mixing up right now with the B hardener. So again, we're mixing it at a moderate speed with our drill. We're not whipping any excess air into it. And then about halfway through, we're going to take our tool and we're going to scrape the sides of the bucket just to make sure that none of that B component is stuck to the side of the bucket. And then we'll go ahead and finish mixing. We've also made sure that our epoxy was stored at the proper temperature. It's not too hot, not too cold. We're storing it at room temperature in the low 70s is optimum. And that way it's not already hot once it gets into the bucket. So again, speeding up that curing process. We want as much working time as possible. So we're going to follow all of the parameters as far as temperature and mixing go. And so there's our 3 minutes, and now our product is mixed and it's ready to be applied on the floor. So here's our mixed material, and we're ready to put it out on the floor. The steps are very simple. We're doing this with just a single color, but the process would be the same if you were using 2 colors. So we'll go ahead and we'll get started pouring. So we're just going to go ahead and dump out the entire contents of this bucket randomly all over our space. Now we want to get the material out of the bucket as quickly as possible, so we mixed it for 3 minutes, and then within another 2 to 3 minutes we want to have this material all out of the bucket. That's going to give us the maximum amount of working time that we're looking for. The longer the material is left in the bucket, the shorter the working time is that you're going to have, because the epoxy is generating heat. Heat is what dries or cures epoxy, so we don't want that to happen to us while it's in the material. Here's just a little tip before we start squeegeeing. That's something that's very common that people do after they pour the epoxy, because they're trying to get every last drop of epoxy to drain out on the floor. We say don't do that, and the reason is because there could be some unmixed resin that's in the bottom of this bucket, whether it be A or B, and now that unmixed resin is going to drip out on the floor, and it's going to cause the epoxy to not harden properly in those areas. We've seen it often where people will have 3 or 4 kits, and they'll call us and they'll say that they have 3 or 4 spots on their floor that didn't dry. And that's simply because they turned the bucket upside down. So you can allow most of the material to drain out of the bucket, but don't actually turn it over and leave it upside down trying to get every last drop out of the bucket. That's just going to lead to a problem. So we've got it poured out onto the floor. We'll get our squeegee and we'll go ahead and start squeegeeing. All right, so now we squeegee the epoxy over the entire surface. And again, we're using our magic trowel squeegee. It's a real nice tool that puts the epoxy on just perfectly. Another nice thing about the magic trowel is it gets right up to the edges of the wall, so you almost don't have to do any sort of edge work. Just let the magic trowel do all the work for you. But we're just randomly squeegeeing this epoxy all over the floor. There's really no right or wrong way to do it. At this point, we're just trying to get coverage on the whole floor. We've got our spike shoes on. That's allowing us to be able to walk in the epoxy without leaving big holes or divots. The holes that are left behind are so small from the spikes that just due to the flow, the natural flow of the epoxy, all of them will close back in on their own. Now, as you can see, we're just doing a single color. This is our silver, but the process would have pretty much been the same had we been using two colors. We would have just done a bucket of silver, and then if it was a second color, we would have done a bucket of the second color. Random ribbons, as we did with the silver, and then we just, right now, instead of blending or spreading a single color, we would be blending and spreading both colors over the floor. But this video would just give you an idea of the different steps that are involved in actually installing the metallic, and give you an opportunity to see what a single color looks like. Of course, if you want to see the process in detail for doing a two-color design, we have plenty of videos on our YouTube channel and also on our website at epoxyplus.com. We're spreading this at a rate of about 180 to 200 square feet per 3-gallon kit. Thicker the better with the metallic. If you choose to use less material and go thinner, you will not get as much depth out of the epoxy, and it just doesn't have quite the same look. So we feel that the right amount is at about 180 square feet per 3-gallon kit. Now, this is a small job, so it's easy for one person to do this themselves. Had this been a larger job, let's say you're doing 1,000 square feet or more, you would probably want some help. It's nice to have somebody mix, somebody squeegee, and somebody back roll. However, if you do follow the recommendations and the steps that we outline, it is possible for even one person with proper prep to do even a large job totally by themselves. All right, so that's it for the squeegeeing. We've got the epoxy covering the whole floor, and now we'll begin the back rolling process. All right, so the first thing that we want to do is go ahead and saturate our roller covers before we start rolling the floor. The reason being that these 3/8 nap shed-free or shed-resistant rollers, they hold a lot of material. And if we were just to go ahead and start rolling the floor right now, the roller is just going to be picking up material, and we don't want that. So we've left a little puddle right here of product, as you can see. And now we'll just take a minute and we'll saturate this roller. And that way the rolling process will be a little bit easier for us. And we'll do the same thing for our little 4-inch edge roller. All right, so I think those are pretty good. All right, so we take our edge roller and we hit the edges real quick, and it's almost not even a matter of really rolling it. We're almost just pushing material right up against the edge of the wall very quick, just to get full coverage of everything. So we push it just to the edge just a little bit, almost acting as a squeegee. And that's all there is to rolling out the edges. Now we go ahead and we take our 18-inch roller and we can begin the rolling process across the floor with the 18-inch roller. Now we typically want to roll the epoxy 2 to 3 times, and we want to do that in different directions. So if we start off going north and south, then the next pass will go east to west. And then if we feel like we want to do it a third time, we would go in an alternate direction. But as you can see with these 18-inch roller covers, it's a really fast process, and that's why we include the 18-inch roller covers in our toolkits, because it's just the professional way to do this. It's a time saver. You can cover a lot of ground with this. An 18-inch roller is like 3 people rolling with 9-inch rollers. The other advantage to an 18-inch roller as well is that the weight is evenly distributed across the roller, whereas a 9-inch roller, you have more weight on one side than another. So we just finished the first pass with our 18-inch roller cover, and the floor is looking really good. But you remember we put up our blue tape along the walls to protect our baseboards. We have 2 choices at this point. We can leave the tape up and come back tomorrow to remove it, or we can remove the tape now. Option number 2 is much better, removing the tape now. It's just a matter of pulling it off right now. It'll take us 2 minutes to do it. If we wait until tomorrow, this epoxy is going to be hard. It's going to have locked in the tape at the bottom, and it's going to be a lot of work to get the tape off. It's going to require some kind of utility knife or razor blade knife in order to score the bottom of the tape, and then being very careful to pull it off because the epoxy won't be anywhere near cured yet. So our option that we're going to take is to pull it off now, and I'm going to show you how easy that is. It's literally just a matter of picking it up and pulling it. Now, one tip with the tape: instead of putting up small pieces of tape and ripping it off from the roll and another small piece, we encourage you to do long pieces going all the way across an entire wall or more. And that way you can simply just go like this, and it will come off in just one continuous piece. Very easy. Extremely simple. We're taking just not even a minute to do it right now, and it could potentially save us hours and hours of work tomorrow. So we've got one more wall that we want to do. We'll go ahead and take that off now. All right, so we just pulled off all of our tape, and we're going to go ahead and do our second roll. This time we're going in the opposite direction. So we just laid out our metallic epoxy. We poured it out on the floor in ribbons. We squeegeed it around the floor using our magic trowel, and then we came back with our 18-inch shed-free roller, and we rolled the floor 2 times. Now you may choose to roll it a 3rd time. There's nothing wrong with that. You may see some areas that you feel that need just a little bit more attention, maybe where there's a little bit too high of a concentration of a particular color. You can take your roller at this time and you can massage it or roll it or move it around or however you want to do it with the roller. But we're very satisfied with the way this floor looks right now, so we're going to go ahead and leave it as is. Please keep in mind that the next coating to be applied would be a urethane top coat. If you choose to install a urethane in order to help you plan your project, please keep in mind that the urethane top coat will be installed as soon as the metallic epoxy is dry and walkable, meaning not tacky. This usually takes about 16 hours to dry. However, in order to help you plan properly, the urethane top coat must be installed on top of the metallic epoxy within 24 hours. If you miss the 24-hour recoat window, you will have to sand the epoxy with a 60 grit sanding screen in order to create the proper bond for the urethane top coat to adhere properly. In other words, the urethane top coat would typically be installed between the 16th and 24th hour after the initial installation of the metallic epoxy. So at this point, we've allowed the floor to settle for about 30 minutes, and we're going to demonstrate an optional technique on this floor, and that's to spray it with some denatured alcohol. You can also use an acetone or other solvents. We like to use a denatured alcohol because it's less harsh of a chemical, and the smell or the fumes from the alcohol dissipate fairly quickly. But what this is going to do is going to cause the pigments to start kind of separating a little bit on the floor, and it creates a real unique look, almost like a crater type look. Some people refer to it as a lunar look, but it creates just a real nice look, even like a hammered copper type look. So we have our denatured alcohol in our spray bottle, we have our safety glasses, and we'll go ahead and just start randomly spraying this out on the floor. Now, we like to use these handheld spray bottles because they're just real easy to control, but you can really use any type of a sprayer, even a pump-up sprayer will work as well, but these handheld sprayers are just real nice. And we go ahead and we just randomly spritz it all around the space. If you get a little bit up on the walls like that, it's really not a big deal. The alcohol is clear, and it also evaporates almost instantly if it hits any surface like a wall or anything else. And you just have to determine how much of this you want to do. Timing is crucial with this. If you do it too soon, the epoxy is flowing too much and it will just all dissipate and go away. You won't capture the effect. If you wait too long, then you could actually form an actual crater in the epoxy because the epoxy will have set up too much and it doesn't have any flow for that crater to fill back in and go away. So what we do is we go at about the 30-minute mark and we test a little bit in a corner somewhere, watch it for a couple of minutes, and if you see the effect holding, then you know it's okay to go ahead and do the rest of the floor. 30 minutes seems to be about the right mark, but depending on temperatures and things like that, it could be 45 minutes, it could even be upwards of an hour. Again, we're using our spike shoes. That way, when we walk on the floor, all of the little holes created by the spikes will still fill in because the epoxy is still fluid enough. So you can see the effect that it creates, and you can notice that there's separation going on with the pigments. It creates these little shapes, little pattern on the epoxy. And it's just a real neat look. And again, this is an optional technique. You do not have to do this at all. You could just let the epoxy settle out and cure after rolling it. But this is a neat effect that we thought we would show you. So here we are back at our floor the next day, and as you can see, the results are absolutely incredible. This is our silver metallic epoxy, and we did this with just one color, although we did use denatured alcohol to create this really nice character on the floor. It's been about 16 hours since we did the floor, and the floor is nowhere near cured, but it is dry enough or hard enough now where we're able to walk on the floor. We installed this at the optimum temperatures in the room. It was about 72 degrees, so we recommend between 68 and 72, and at those temperatures your floor will be dry and walkable the next day, usually around the 12 to 16 hour mark. So now that the metallic epoxy floor has been installed, now it's time to install the urethane top coat. So the final component to a complete designer metallic epoxy system is a urethane top coat. Now we're going to demonstrate our U4000 High Wear Urethane on this floor, and the unique thing about that product is it can be installed in 3 different finishes. Here we're going to install it in a gloss finish. Over here we'll install it in a semi-gloss finish, and then finally in the last part of the floor we'll install it in a full satin finish. Now we're not going to show you right now how to mix up each component. There's a detailed video for each finish on our website, but we're going to give you an overall view of how to install the urethane system in the various finishes, and then finally you'll get to see a side-by-side comparison of the different sheens that the urethane floor produces. At this stage, you'll go ahead and take care of any imperfections that are in the floor. In this case, some dirt got into the wet epoxy and created a bubble. So we're using a 60 grit sanding screen to sand it out to make the floor flat and flush. We'll clean up any debris with denatured alcohol, and then we'll go ahead and start coating it with our urethane. So we'll go ahead and get started, and this first section is going to be the U4000 mixed up as a gloss. So that's just combining the A and the B part. And we're using a foam roller to install this. That way we're trying to minimize any lint or imperfections coming off of the roller. And you can see that I'm wearing spiked shoes, and we're rolling this off in 2 different directions, making sure that we get full coverage on the floor. Of course, on your project, you'll take a 4-inch roller or a small roller in order to cut in your edges, and then you'll use one of these 18-inch rollers to roll out the main part of the floor. And you also notice that we're wearing spiked shoes in order to be able to walk in the material. That way we're sure to be able to roll it out in both directions. And we'll roll over the previous little section just to even everything out, but we want to be very careful that we're not over rolling it as well. So once we have all of the urethane in place, then we go ahead and we move on to the next section. So this will cover between 400 and 500 square feet per kit. So it's a thin coating. It doesn't have a lot of leveling properties. No urethane does, because it's going down so thin. So you will probably see a very slight, what they call orange peel texture in the floor. But by installing it at the correct coverage rates and also in the right temperatures, it'll really help to minimize that at all. All right, so now we'll go ahead and we'll begin installing the same urethane, the U4000, but in a semi-gloss finish. And of course we have a detailed video on the installation of all of these finishes on the website, how to mix them, how to install them, and other tips and tricks. But we're saturating our 3/8 nap roller. And we're going to go ahead and install it in just a very similar fashion as we did the gloss finish. And again, we're rolling it in both directions, so it's helpful to wear the spiked shoes while doing this. It's not, you don't have to, but it just certainly helps because you're able to walk out into the wet product and then inspect it from different angles, because the lighting can fool you into thinking that you've covered the entire space, whereas in reality you may have missed a spot. So it's always nice to be able to go out in the material and look at it. So again, we're doing just small sections at a time, same coverage rate, 400 to 500 square feet. But we've added some of the C component into this, which is going to give us more of a semi-gloss finish, although you will see when we're done that it actually still has a really nice shine to it. But that C component adds abrasion resistance, which in turn will make your floor more durable. But the installation process is about the same, although we've switched to a different type of roller cover. We're using a 3/8 nap shed resistant roller cover for this. And once again, this leaves just a very, very slight texture on the floor, but it makes for a super durable finish. All right, so it looks like we've done with this section. We'll go ahead and just walk around, viewing it in some different lighting real quick, and it looks like we have everything covered. So we'll move on to the full satin finish. All right, so now we'll install the full satin finish, and basically to achieve that finish, we're adding in the full contents of the C component. So that gets mixed thoroughly into the A and the B parts. Now when you add the full contents of the C component, making it a satin finish, as it says on the instructions or on the label on the can, it's almost impossible to over-roll it at this stage. Now with your gloss and your semi-gloss, you can over-roll it, and we don't want you to over-roll it. But with the satin finish, it's almost impossible to do that. You can just continue to roll it until you have it in place. Although the installation or the time it takes is really not much longer than doing a gloss or a satin finish. But it does eliminate the risk of over-rolling. And we're also using a 3/8 snap roller to install the satin finish. And it's going down at the same coverage rate of 500 square feet per kit for the satin finish. You can go just slightly thinner than if you're doing a gloss. And so we'll just continue to roll this out until the whole space is covered. And then we'll let everything cure out overnight, and we'll come back and we'll make a side-by-side comparison of the 3 different finishes. So it's been about 24 hours since we installed our urethane top coat. We're able to walk on it, although it's nowhere near cured. But you remember that we installed it in 3 different finishes. We did a gloss, a semi-gloss, and a satin finish. And as you recall, we said that there was pros and cons to all 3 different finishes. So we're going to go ahead now and take a look at them and discuss what the advantages or disadvantages might be in the particular finish that you would choose. All right, so over on this side, we installed the gloss finish. Now, the gloss finish is impressive. It shows the most depth in the floor. It reflects the most amount of light. But anything super high gloss is going to show wear and tear. It's going to show fine scratches, just like it does on a car, on a marble surface, even on a wood surface. Anything high gloss is going to show more wear and tear. It's a little bit more difficult to install. It can tend to show a few more imperfections, but it is an impressive looking finish. And again, we achieve this by only mixing up the A and the B part of our U4000 urethane. Now, as we move over into the middle section, this is where we did our semi-gloss finish, and this is where we added in just a little bit, about a cup of the C component powder into it. Now, the sheen is a little bit diminished. However, there's still really nice reflectivity in this floor. The advantage here is that we're getting a lot of the gloss, we're getting a lot of the reflectivity, but we've added a layer of protection and durability to the floor now by adding in some of that C component powder. Now we move over here where we did our satin finish, and this is where we added in all of the C component. This gives us a full satin finish, and the shine is diminished. There is a difference between the satin and the semi-gloss. It's not showing as much reflection of objects in the floor. The light is not reflecting as much as the other finishes. The advantage to going with this satin finish is that it's going to give you the absolute most protection and durability, most long-term wear, the least amount of maintenance of any top coat that you could put on a floor. This is amazing for high traffic areas, commercial properties, retail stores, garage floors, even for homes, for those that aren't looking for such a high gloss and such a high shine. So again, there's the differences in the finishes. There's some of the advantages and disadvantages. As well, we mentioned that the gloss finish might be a little bit trickier to install, whereas the semi-gloss and the satin finish are a little bit more user-friendly and a little bit more forgiving and a little bit easier to install. So I know that the camera, it has a hard time picking up the different sheens. So it might be a little bit hard right now for you to see the variations in them, but we're going to move the camera around and try to find some angles where you're able to see them side by side, where you can see the differences in the sheens a little bit more clearly. All right, so we'll start over here with the gloss finish urethane, and you can really see how the light's really reflecting in the finish. You can see the sheen on the floor. And then as we move over into the semi-gloss, you can see how the light, how it changes, and it's diminished a little bit. It's not quite as bright as it is over here when we get into the gloss section. But if I pan up like this, you can really see that's a nice finish. That's semi-gloss finish in the middle there. and then we come back over into the gloss. And I know it's hard to see in the camera. There's our gloss finish, and then we come back over into the semi-gloss finish. We're still seeing reflections. You can see the wall in the finish. We'll turn this way and go back. There's the gloss, and then coming back into the semi-gloss. And then if we continue on over, see, we'll pick up our light again there. And then as we cross over into the satin finish, we can see how the light diminishes a little bit more. There it is in the semi-gloss, and then it's diminished a little bit as we get into the satin finish. You see that the color of the floor doesn't change. And for some people, it's even a little bit difficult to see the difference in the finishes, especially in the semi-gloss finish. So here we are in the gloss, and then we'll move on over into the semi-gloss, and you can see how the sheen changes, but there still is a nice shine, some nice reflectivity still into the semi-gloss. And then as we go from the semi-gloss, moving on over into the full satin finish. So now we'll go back in the opposite direction, and we're looking at the satin going into the semi-gloss. And then finally into the gloss finish. We put this toy car on the surface of the epoxy to hopefully give you a little bit better idea as to the different finishes that can be achieved with the U4000 urethane. When you look at the gloss finish, you can see the real reflection and clarity of the gloss finish. The car is very clear in the epoxy. You look at the wheel, you can see the spokes very clearly. Compare that to the semi-gloss finish. Well, you can still certainly see the car reflected very nicely in the finish. You can make out the wheel and the spokes very clear as well, but not as much clarity as the gloss finish. Compare that to the satin finish, where you can still make out the reflection of the car. You can see the wheel in the car, but the spokes now are not as clear in the finish. So it's definitely diminished from even the semi-gloss finish. But as we've mentioned in the video, there are pros and cons to all three finishes, and hopefully this gives you a little bit of help in determining which finish you want. I hope this video has given you the confidence that you can install a designer metallic epoxy floor. You can visit our website at www.epoxyplus.com, where you'll find more installation information and videos. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you don't miss our next installation video.